on. Hello, and welcome everyone. Welcome to those that are just joining us. Welcome to this third event of the Ukrainian Skies series. And today we're talking to three think tank experts from Ukraine on defending Ukraine and on the current war, Russian war against Ukraine. So we will discuss today the current security priorities for Ukraine, what policies would be most efficient for partner governments to implement, and what points of action could the broader public abroad campaign for. When I say we, I mean Daria, Marianne, and myself as a part of community of Ukrainians in Scotland. We have been organizing a series of these kind of events for the past couple of weeks since the war started, called Ukrainian Skies, where we're trying to have a conversation with different people, whether it's people on the ground in Ukraine or sympathetic politicians across Europe, or think tank experts like today, on basically trying to make sense of this whole situation that is going on and collectively think what actions are most effective, efficient, and impactful to stop this war as soon as possible. So Daria has just posted a link to the chat onto some other resources that we have been producing as part of this. They include also some texts, links to videos, links to fundraiser campaigns that we have been running. We have also been doing kind of more campaigning focus work in trying to advocate for more military aid in the UK and in Scotland in particular as kind of one of the more urgent priorities for Ukrainian aid. I think that's kind of, that's a quick way of introducing ourselves. So just to say that also maybe, hello, my name is Irina Zamuroeva, and we have Daria Tsymbaluk with us here today, and Marianne Pohele, with whom we've been organizing the series of events. And I will hand over to Marianne to introduce our speakers today.
Okay, so hello all, welcome to our event. So I'll introduce the speakers. So first we have Maria Zolkina, a political analyst at Ilko Kucheriv Democratic Initiative Foundation. She's a co-founder of Kalmus Group and DAD fellow since 2014. Maria has been developing comprehensive expertise regarding Russia-Ukraine conflict in Donbass. So next we have Hanna Shelest, Director for Security Program at Foreign Policy Council, Ukrainian Prism, and the editor and co-chief Ukraine Analytica. Prior to this, she has served for more than 10 years as a senior researcher at National Institute for Strategic Studies in Odessa. And in 2014, she has served as a visiting research fellow at NATO Defense College in Rome. And in Edinburgh, she was a John Smith fellowship. She was conducting it at Festival of Literature, of course. And last but not least, Artem Remizov, Senior Research Fellow at Institute for Economic Research and Policy Consulting, responsible for communication, analytical administration, for administrative support for 3 DCFTA's projects, understanding the use association agreements and deep comprehensive free trade areas with Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia. Previously worked at the Center for European Policy Studies. And he also has studied in Glasgow University, so this is a Scottish connection in a way. So thank you all for arriving. Yeah, hopefully I'll pass it on now.
Yep, thank you. And just a quick note on the format of the event. So we have an hour together until the 7 o'clock Ukrainian time. 8 o'clock Ukrainian time. And we will have 3 short inputs, all of them covering the war in Ukraine from kind of different angles. We'll hear first a bit more on the kind of what is currently going on in Ukraine and specifically in the occupied territories, on the kind of what the peace talks are and what their possibilities are, and also on the concrete steps that can be taken by the governments and by the public to support Ukraine right now. We'll have some time for Q&A at the end, but feel free to type in your questions in the chat just as we go on so that we can pick them up and ask them our speakers. I think, that's all as a way of introduction. Daria, I'm going to hand over to you for the next part.
We'll just kind of frame a bit of the questions and pass on to Maria. who will be our first speaker. So I think in the past weeks, and I was at BASIS at a conference in Cambridge over the weekend, and Sarah Rainsford, who is a BBC Eastern European correspondent, during her keynote also brought up this concern that the war might go on for longer than a lot of us hope, and that we have to prepare for kind of a long-term conflict, which of course was very difficult for me to hear as somebody whose father is also on the ground defending Ukraine. And given that kind of that perspective, and also what's happening in Ukraine now, since a lot of time already passed since the escalation, Maria, could you maybe just tell us what is the situation on the ground, particularly in territories which are occupied? What are the most kind of present developments that you would like to highlight?
Thank you, Daria. I have been dealing with the expertise and different types of research, especially different types of public opinion research in conflict-affected areas of Donbas, including government control areas of Donbas and sometimes non-government control areas of Donbas, since the conflict with Russia has started, because invasion happened in 2014 when Russian regular troops for the first time crossed the border between Ukraine and Russia, and but they didn't, recognize their presence, though it was confirmed by number of hard facts and evidences. I'm originally from this region, so I was grown up in the very east of Luhansk region. And in 2014, my native hometown, which is actually a home village, stayed on the very edge between government control areas of Luhansk region and occupied ones. And it was the only one crossing point which functioned in Luhansk area during all 8 years. So there was the serious movement between two territories. Actually, maybe this made me turn from foreign policy research and research in the area of European Union and Ukraine relations, which I was involved before 2014. I turned into making more research on conflict-related issues, and never regretted, actually. But my previous foreign policy experience seriously strengthened my skills to understand how the conflict develops. One of the ways why we pretend, actually, at my organization that we understand very well what was going on during all these 8 years, and why we pretend to understand how the situation goes on right now, because it is like a comprehensive overview, like a pie. So to know what is going on the ground using different types of field research and public opinion research in conflict affected communities, then analyze what is going on national level, and I use my experience in analyzing foreign policy for understanding the logic of negotiations and needed policy from international actors. So as of now, after 1.5 months of the second invasion, Donbas again in the very center of the war, generally speaking, because this is the main battlefield as of now. And it turned to be the main battlefield not yesterday and not today, but around 3 weeks ago, when the heaviest and the most bloody direct fights between Ukrainian army and Russian army started being conducted in Luhansk region. Though we all paid, we all, like white public, mass media, we all have been paying much more attention when we're speaking about the east of Ukraine to what is going on in encircled and blocked Mariupol, because there is a humanitarian catastrophe. But in terms of real battles, of real confrontation, direct battles between two armies, this is all about Luhansk region for 3.5 weeks already. And I will explain now. First of all, why it is the main battlefield. First of all, this is the ideological explanation, because everything was from Russian side started with the idea that they have to, so to say, like they pretend to liberate Donbas. It means that back in 2014, only 30% of Donbas, like 2 regions in the very east, Donetsk and Luhansk region, were occupied by Russian troops. During all these years, propaganda stated that the other part needed to be joined and reunited with occupied territories. And that is the ideological explanation why they are trying to reach the goal. But the current stage of the conflict after February 24, it's not about Donbas at all, because this is not enough for Russia, neither from its foreign policy priorities nor in its concrete direct confrontation with Ukraine. And that is why they started with attack on other regions of Ukraine in the north, in south of Ukraine. One of their main goals was Kiev, but they failed to proceed in other regions. And this is military explanation why, as of now, Russia actually was pushed to concentrate its forces on one concrete direction, because the general large-scale invasion failed. And this failure was unexpected both for Russian side, and we have to be honest, for lots of Ukrainian Western partners who did nothing during first 48 hours after invasion, exactly because they were pretty sure that Ukraine will fall and Kiev will fall. And what for them to send new military aid to Ukraine? What for to launch severe sanctions against Russia if Ukraine will anyway fall? Next 2 weeks after invasion, when it was already, after first 2 days, when it was already obvious that Ukraine is not gonna fail, it resisting to absolutely unbelievable level of efficiency, we started receiving help in terms of military assistance, sanctions against Russia, and some political isolation of Russia and financial isolation of Russia. But anyway, Russia still tried to fix its presence in north, east, and south of Ukraine. And again, this stage of Russia's military attempts failed, because in the very north, they were defeated. And after all, they were not like according to their goodwill, but they had to step back from Kiev, because these subdivisions and military units were simply not able to, not only to conduct a new offensive on Kiev, but also to stay in the north of Ukraine, because in the direct battles with Ukrainian army, they will be destroyed and defeated completely. And that's why they pulled back. The same story was in Sumy region, just in Kharkiv. And to understand the scale of this failure, which is not like pathetic idea, but concrete fact, Kharkiv or Sumy, this is just several dozens of kilometers from Russian border, from the border between Ukraine and Russia. So this is actually on the very border. And even there, they failed to occupy the region and to capture, during land operation, to capture the cities. That is why in the second half of this period after February 24, Russia 100% changed its tactics and concentrated mainly on air and missile attacks, like with fighter jets, with missiles against Ukrainian cities. So when in the first half of March, it was, I would say, 30% of the activity plus 70% of the activity plus 30% for land operation. Up to the beginning of April, it is like 90% of air attacks and only 10% of land operation. And this land operation is mainly concentrated in Donbas, where they need to show something. And here from military component, we return again to new ideological priorities for this period of the war, because Russia needs to show some successes up to May 9. For the Western world, where dates and symbols at this very moment do not mean so much as for Russia, we don't, it's hard to understand for why public that Putin simply needs to show that he is a victor and he has some successes. That's why they concentrated in Donbas and try to do that, to capture the whole Donbas. Besides of ideology, we have to understand that in Donbas, exactly because the war started from Donbas 8 years ago, Ukraine has the most efficient military units, the most professional, the most trained, the most skilled ones. And that is why Russia's first priority for the upcoming weeks is not only just to grab the territory, but to try to encircle and defeat the most skilled units of Ukrainian army. And exactly because of that, military aid to Ukraine was so needed to support these units and not to allow not even their defeat, but even, you know, serious weakness, serious weakening of these military units. Now about the situation from like how Russia is present on the territories which it occupied. During first weeks after the invasion, I was horrified every time when I saw the maps of occupation, maps in international media where I give lots of comments. When every battlefield in every region was considered to be like the proof of occupation of this region by Russian troops, which was simply not true. So there were battlefield, and it doesn't mean that if Russian troops are there, that this region should be considered as occupied. What is, as of now, Russian troops are still widely present in around 2/3 of Luhansk region, where I am originally from, in still 30–40% of Donetsk region, because they didn't break seriously the defense line in Donetsk region, besides of Mariupol, which is situated separately from the other part of previously occupied Donbas. They are present in Kherson Oblast, where still Ukrainian army keeps very high level of pressure on Russian troops, trying to conduct local counteraction operations. And this is not just about the liberation of that or that village. This is about the creation of general military pressure, because in Kherson Oblast, according to our local resources, so there is the general feeling that this region is not under Russian troops for a long period of time. So liberation by Ukrainian army is expected, and Russian troops are always tense. And this is not like what happened in Donbas, for instance, 8 years ago, where they settled and started, you know, creating occupational structures and so on. This is completely different story in Kherson region. And they are present in part of Zaporizhia region, where they captured the biggest in the European continent nuclear power plant. So as of now, this is like one region of Ukraine which is almost fully, like 80–90% covered by presence of the Russian troops, and it is still not the full-fledged occupation. I will explain now why. Part of Zaporizhia region and part of Donetsk and Lugansk region. Why this is not a full-fledged occupation? Because occupation means creation of a severe occupational regime, including occupational administrations and the process of governing these territories with the usage of these occupational administrations. Up to now, Russia started terrorizing local population in Kherson region, in part of Zaporizhia region, severely, but they haven't created any serious occupational structure there. And the reason, again, this is like fact, but not some kind of imaginable thinking or wishful thinking, is a very simple one. people were protesting against Russian occupations in almost all the most significant cities, including Kherson itself, almost every day. So this is incredible picture when unarmed people are protesting in a very severe way, sending people somewhere very far. Those people with weapons and military vehicles and so on, like, go away from here, this is our land, and so on. And it has been lasting for several weeks already. And they simply lack collaborators on the ground. Because, for instance, in Kherson region, the plan was to declare so-called People's Republic in Kherson, like it happened in Donbass 8 years ago. But the local council, before it stopped physical working in the administration building in Kherson, clearly, openly, publicly declared that they, as representatives and legitimate local deputies, do not support any creation of any new structures, because there is legitimate Ukrainian mayors, local councils, and so on. And as of now, Russians failed to find in every city all the people they need to start the real, occupational, to create occupational umbrella. That's why they're terrorizing local population. Around 7,000, this is the approximate numbers of locals who were protesting or who were recognizable, visible persons on the ground in Kherson region. They were captured and they are some or kidnapped. The pre-trial, how to call them, the pre-trial spaces in local police, they are overcrowded. But nevertheless, even under these circumstances, people are going to protest even now. So this is the sign of local resistance, which stops Russians from being, the owners of this land. In Donbass, they are trying to physically to destroy the cities and towns, and that is why they're using heavy artillery. They're using air and missile and fighter jets attacks and missile attacks almost every day against especially territories in Luhansk region. But this is an interesting fact. As of now, around 65% of Luhansk region is under Russian control. But if you know the story, how it happened, the picture is assessed in a different way. After invasion on February 24th, Ukrainian army consciously stepped back from several settlements, including mine 81, Stanitsa Luhanska, Shelest, and it was for simple geographical reason, because these settlements, they are geographically are situated lower than Luhansk itself, and it is like 20 kilometers between Shelest and Luhansk and 10 kilometers between Stanitsa and Luhansk, and they were simply fired from the heavy artillery from higher hills down, and that's why there was no reason to stay there and die. And army stepped back and pull Russian army, on a flat surface to conduct the direct battle. So, and they occupied, of course, they stepped back into Shelest, Stanitsa, and other settlements between them. So that was their so-called victory, how they occupied this part of the land. And another part where Russians are present now is in the very border, is in the very east, along the border of Luhansk region and Russia. And that is the part of the territory where there almost never were serious defense units of Ukrainian army after 2014, because they were along the front line. So Russia captured the land where there were no or almost no Ukrainian army, let's say. But after they came up to other settlements and towns, Rubizhne, Severodonetsk, Lysychansk, Popasna, they were stopped there. And for almost 4 weeks already, they cannot break the defense line from the positions where Ukrainian army is standing. And that is why the level of skills of Ukrainian army is really, from quality point of view, though I'm not a military expert, they are like much higher than anyone could expect. And these guys really deserve to be equipped well in order to stop, because they are stopping. They simply do their job and do not allow Russians to proceed. And the last issue, like 2 minutes, about very important issue of deportation of Ukrainian people from currently occupied areas. This is one of the way Russia tries to terrorize local population in temporary occupied by Russian troops areas. So they try to persecute people. They do not have resources for that. By the way, regarding this persecution, Russians, they had to bring so-called public police, so-called public militia units from Luhansk, from occupied part of Luhansk and Donetsk region, where these units were created back in 2014. They had to bring those units from these self-proclaimed republics to Kherson region, because in Kherson, they didn't find enough collaborators among local police to oppress local population. And that's why they bring hundreds of people from Luhansk, where they have these structures, to persecute local and terrorize local population. Another attempt of terrorizing, this is committing war crimes, because the first, for instance, the first rapes cases, they were reported in Kherson, not in Bucha. The first recorded, the first fixed crimes of sexual, the first sexual crimes, they were fixed in Kherson region, when the region was just several days after Kherson itself was appeared to be under Russian control. And after that, it was like rolling back as this instrument of terrorizing local population. But another crime, another violation of international humanitarian law is forceful deportation of people. Mainly, Russia is concentrated on deporting people from Mariupol, which is fully encircled, and Russia has never given a permission to organize massive humanitarian corridor for people from Mariupol to flee to Ukraine-controlled territory. So people left Mariupol and went to Ukraine-controlled territory, not in the framework of evacuation corridors, because they were never confirmed by Russia, but at the risk of their own life and their own vehicles, or by foot. But at the same time, Russia started a couple of weeks ago, they started sending their buses and vehicles also, like even private ones. They redirect them and say, you will not be allowed to reach Ukraine-controlled territories, you are going to Rostov or somewhere else. Up to now, we do not have concrete figures, but it's 2 weeks ago, according to local authorities, it was around 50,000 of population only from Mariupol. Now I believe it is at least twice bigger from Mariupol to Rostov. From there, according to open data sources, people are not settled in Rostov. They are sent to the far east of Russia, to Siberia, or to other very far, and which is very important, depressive regions of the Russian Federation. It means that these people will not have money once they are there to return to Ukraine or leave Russia. Russia deport Ukrainian kids claiming that they are saving them, for instance, from orphanages in Mariupol. But all orphanages in Mariupol were evacuated by Ukrainian authorities during first 2 days after invasion. So as of now, hundreds and thousands of Ukrainian children deported by Russia from Mariupol to Russia. These are children who were made orphans either by Russian troops or they have parents, but they are separated. Up to now, it is around 130,000 of Ukrainian kids who were from different locations deported to Russia. And this is incredible war crime or a violation of humanitarian law. And unfortunately, International Committee of the Red Cross, which is not supposed but is obliged to deal with such kind of situation, they do not try to prevent this. Instead, they are pretending that they will just try to take care of these people in Russia, though it means nothing. So they are not, trying to fix the situation on the ground. And Russia will continue. In Kherson and in Zaporizhia region, forceful deportation is organized in a much less visible scope, so not as massively, but anyway, people are relocated mainly to Crimea, and this is done again, like sometimes forcefully, sometimes they try to relocate people on their trying to make them live and promise that it will be, much more calm in Crimea than in Kherson or in Zaporizhia. But anyway, any kind of relocations in the under current circumstances, they are the direct violation of international humanitarian law. And here I will stop. Thanks.
Thank you so much. My next question is to Hanna Shelest. And so here in the West, there is a lot of talk about peaceful solutions to this confrontation. So my question is about how realistic is a peaceful scenario? How realistic is negotiation between Ukraine and Russia? How realistic, what concessions can Russia and Ukraine give to each other and willing to realistically offer? We heard that Putin already said that he's not very interested in negotiating for Donbass, for Crimea. There was talk about reparations. There was a lot of talk about reparations. So how realistic is negotiating table? How realistic is this peaceful solution? So I'll let you answer.
Thank you, Marianne, for this question. Thank you, Maria, for giving such a broad presentation of what is happening on the ground. And it seems to me that when I will be talking about the negotiations and possible scenarios, that's very important to keep in mind what is currently on the ground, because definitely the negotiations are driven, I would say, by the situation on the ground. And we really saw these developments. If you remember the last 50 days, the first talks about possible negotiations appeared just a few days after the start of the invasion. And the first time Ukrainian delegation flew to the territory of Belarus for the first round and second round. Then these negotiations moved to Istanbul because of the security reasons. And if you follow the Russian statements and claims, they've been evaluating. Regionally, they've been talking about not just a maximum, but in ultimatums. There's been phrases about change of the Ukrainian governance or Ukrainian armed forces surrender. Then they've been talking about demilitarization of Ukraine, denazification as they imagine it, and many issues like these, the status of the Russian language. So all those narratives that they've been promoted as the reason of war, and also all those narratives they've been cultivating inside of the Russian Federation, they put on the table. And as we heard from the first rounds of negotiations, they've been extremely difficult because Russians came not to negotiate, but just to make their claims and waiting for what Ukraine can agree. And here agreeing was not perceived as a compromise, but we heard it from their statements, they expected Ukraine to surrender. Definitely when the events been following and Ukrainian armed forces managed to fight very professionally and successfully in many directions, the Russian delegation started to be less provocative. They were not pushing some ideas extensively, but at the same time, definitely there have been several issues that they've been still claiming. That's why Ukrainian delegation started to propose certain scenarios. And here, definitely, we still have a lot of questions because we know that the working groups are like discussing the different modalities and possibilities. And the big deal that Ukraine proposed is that maybe we are ready for the neutral status, but only in case of the serious security guarantees for Ukraine that would be signed in the treaty, the legally binding treaty, and that we will have a long list of guarantors. However, as for my opinion, here we have several problems. First is definitely the list of proposed guarantors. Try to imagine in one group, UK, US, Germany, Italy, France, Turkey, Israel, China. Considering that China being more pro-Russian than pro-Ukrainian within these months, considering that Israel took very dubious position and some of their leadership definitely was not playing into Ukrainian hands, considering that Germany still after 50 days just now started discussing the possibilities of giving Ukraine weapons. So what type of the security guarantees these countries could provide to Ukraine in the future? And if these security guarantees would be just to protect Ukraine, that is one thing, but these guarantors should receive certain rights. For example, if Ukraine would like to have the exercises with the foreign military of another country, they needed to receive agreement of the guarantors. Honestly, I've never seen anything like this in other neutral countries around the globe. Even in the most restricted cases like Japan, for example, I've never seen that somebody would agree with whom to have military exercises at their own territory. So we saw that very soon that's been a little bit reconsidered during the negotiations, understanding that it's been probably too much. Another problem is what does mean security guarantees? Because those countries, it is one problem, but then you need all these countries to agree to the certain obligations about Ukraine. And Ukrainian side definitely wanted very serious obligations at the level of the Article 5 of the NATO treaty, meaning the protection of Ukraine, military protection, boots on the ground, weapons support. And as we found out very quickly that most of the countries are not ready for this. They're ready for this only in case Ukraine is a member of NATO, because that is the principle of the collective defense, but not about the individual agreements and promises to provide such an assistance, especially that everybody understood that that is just against the Russian Federation. And all these discussions we still have. And we understand that the only probably things that Ukraine is definitely ready to discuss, it is to have negotiations about Crimea and separate districts of Donetsk and Lugansk regions as the separate track, as it's been before February 2020. Because the fact that Ukraine is saying that, first of all, we need to return back to the pre-war situation. So the Russian forces need to leave the territory of Ukraine. And then, if you want, we can start negotiations. We are not rejecting Ukrainian sovereignty over the Donetsk, Lugansk regions and Crimea. But at the same time, maybe about some autonomy, about some special rights or wherever, we are ready to continue negotiations as we had with you prior to the invasion. As for now, that's really very difficult to say how far these negotiations go, because it looks like both sides are trying to buy a little bit of time. And for the Russian Federation, because they are not like they don't need negotiations, they need victory, or at least something that they can present as the victory. That's why they need to go to the concessions. The only concession from their side is just to leave the territory of Ukraine. So nobody is asking more. But for Ukrainian side, definitely when we saw that we can fight, that the Russian armed forces are not so mighty as they've been presenting themselves. So the more territory we can liberate, the better is our negotiation position. It doesn't mean that Ukraine doesn't want to stop this war and to have more fighting and they are not thinking about civilians and their lives. No, 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 that's definitely not the issue. But the question is that when another side is not having constructive negotiations, so the only thing you can do at least to buy some additional time and to demonstrate that you are ready to discussing some small issues. And definitely, for example, we saw that we tried to discuss the issue of the Russian side to take the dead bodies of their soldiers from Ukraine and return back to the Russian Federation. Russian Federation rejected this. They didn't want to take them back. Or we tried to discuss the issues of exchange of the prisoners of war. At some level we managed, but not massively as we proposed all for all, but from time to time the groups negotiate for 10 people, 20 people. So the small parties of soldiers and officers being exchanged. We tried to negotiate there about the green corridors, but we also saw that it didn't work as it been planned, and even the mediation of the Greek and French president and prime minister, who asked that they are ready to go to Mariupol to bring the humanitarian aid with their personal presence and to take off from there to evacuate the refugees, the Russian Federation didn't allow that. So all those 20 calls of French President Macron in some way is just in vain, because even such a thing, he was not able to persuade the Russian leadership. But also we see that attempts for mediation are continuing. We see just the Austrian chancellor traveling to Kiev and to Moscow. So everybody's trying to find at least some of the narratives that maybe can be discussed, some issues, some topics, but definitely everything will depend a lot on the situation on the ground. Reparation, that's a little bit different issue. Because reparations can be imposed on the Russian Federation if they would accept that they lost. And we understand perfectly that that's not what the Russian Federation would accept. That's why this issue is not discussed during the negotiations. But that doesn't mean that Ukraine doesn't have mechanisms for the reparation in the future. We see now how the different governments around not only Europe, but offshore zones, Asian countries, Caribbean states are arresting the property of the Russian companies or the Russian oligarchs. And many of them are discussing that some of this money, some of this property can go for the reconstruction of Ukraine. There's been even proposals, like, for example, from Lithuania, that those countries who are buying Russian gas would pay not directly to the Russian Federation, but to the special fund, or at least 50% of this would be delivered to the special fund. And this fund will be used for the reconstruction of Ukraine. I would not even say after the war, because a lot of the stuff already started. Like we see Bucha, Irpin, all these liberated towns around Kiev, the certain reconstruction works already been started there, and they would be continued in case just not the deterioration of the security situation there. That's why the issue of reparation would definitely be on the agenda of the talks with the international government, institutions, international organizations, and courts. Don't forget that Ukraine for all these years also been working a lot in the international courts, tribunals, and all other legal mechanisms being used, both by the state companies, private companies, and Ukrainian state. And even Ukrainian state, we have not only cases like Russia against Ukraine for the Convention of State Sponsoring of Terrorism, or the discrimination of the people rights, human rights in Crimea, but also we had these cases for property in Crimea, for example, the state property of in Crimea, or the prices for gas and many others. And we knew that those big private companies, enterprises that been under the attack, whose property being destroyed, they would definitely go after Russia in the international courts and will try to get the compensation for what's happened over there. That's why, to conclude, I would say that the work will be happening at all dimensions. Courts is the separate, compensation is the separate, there the work is already happening. The prosecution of the war crimes and atrocities, that's the International Criminal Court is working, and prosecutors, officers. Negotiations are happening, and they will be happening if the Russian Federation will come to them. Because here we also should remember how it's been happening with Normandy, when for 2 years the Russian Federation been just ignoring this format of negotiation. But as soon as their delegation is coming, we are talking, we are listening, and waiting for the results. Still, you need to see the composition of the delegation. When just the advisor to the president from the office of the president is the head of the delegation from the Russian side, it gives you the feeling that decision is made only by the president, and other institutions that are usually involved, like Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Ministry of Defense, are definitely excluded from the process of decision-making about the final solution.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Hanna, for that excellent detailing of the concept of, I guess, of negotiation, because we don't hear much of that, what is going on, especially around reparations and those side of things. And yeah, excellent reminder that, yeah, Russia does not really need negotiation, and they need victory. And to have meaningful negotiation, you do need to have someone listening on the other side, which isn't much the case. So with that in mind, we're going to move to Artem Remizov. And yeah, Artem, can you tell us a little bit more about, hearing what we've heard just now from Maria, from Hanna, what relevant military aid to Ukraine would look like? And I'm going to work in a question that we had from the chat as well, if you could maybe comment on that as part of your talk. So we had a question related to this from Peter Brage, asking if you can tell us what to what degree the different promises about military aid are being fulfilled, that are being made by various Western governments right now, and are these arms reaching the soldiers that need them, and how are these getting to Ukraine generally? So yeah, over to you, Artem.
Yeah, thanks for introduction, Irina. Yeah, in terms of military aid, as the war in Ukraine will soon already entered, as Maria said, another phase, maybe one of the critical phases, when Russia is trying to reconfigure its army for a fresh assault in the east and the south of Ukraine. So we may expect proper combined arms maneuver tactics with armor and infantry supported by massed artillery. So kind of Second World War battles that we've seen in the movies, unfortunately. With fewer lines to supply, Russian units should be able to bring a greater concentration of air and artillery to bear. So the aim will be to surround the Ukrainian troops on the east, the most skilled, as Maria said. And so Ukrainian units will also be heavily depleted. So the question is whether the West can move proactively to deter Russia from escalating to a summer offensive, and ensures that Ukrainian units are equipped and prepared for the next round of fighting beyond the Donbas even. So what's really important here is to understand that the level of support that Ukraine received before was enough to stop Russian attacks on the north. And this kind of assistance and military equipment that Ukraine received was either really reminiscent and similar to what they use right now, like Soviet era stuff, or something really like manpads and javelins that it's easily to learn how to use those stuff by mobile units. So now it was enough to stop in the close combat range up to 2 or 3 kilometers maximum of the forces that Russia were pushing from the north, for instance, to Kiev, so push them away. But now the aim should be not only to prevent Russia from gaining any ground, but to destroy as many Russian army units as possible on the territories that Russia already took, like in Kherson on the east, near Mariupol. So if Ukraine can win decisively now, it could avoid a lengthy war of attrition while sending a clear message to Putin. So what does Ukraine need right now? First of all, this comes also both from official channels and from expert community. Ukraine needs combat aircraft and air defense systems to protect citizens and army from missiles and airstrikes. So the Ukrainian Air Force still maintained resistance, valiant resistance, but has slowly been treated and constrained by expanding Russian combat air patrols and defense. So unless Ukraine gets more jets, Russia will be increasingly free to raid and to deep inside the Ukrainian territories, and also to attack forces who will try to attack Russia on the Donbass. So this will be, so any attack of Ukraine will be then diminished by lack of air defense in terms of fighter jets. There were a lot of talks about MiG transfer from Poland. That was a really bad story for us. But there are many different creative solutions. I read, for instance, that Egypt recently procured 46 MiG-29 MS, who might be more even, maybe even better for Ukraine to get along with. But again, those should be exchanged for instance, for US jets and so on. But when it comes to air defense, Ukraine's surface-to-air missiles continue still pose a serious pop-up threat to Russian aircraft, but they will be less effective again in providing mobile defense for Ukrainian forces near the Russian border. So, okay, we can protect our cities more or less from the air raids, less from missiles, but when the big fight will come to those territories that Russia is now pushed Ukraine in the east and the south, then we don't have those mobile, or we have those mobile anti-aircraft units, but their number is still scarce. So pragmatically, Ukraine would like benefit most from this mobile medium to Ranger air defense, like Buk, OSA, S-300, which were delivered from Bulgaria. Slovakia and Greece also have the systems, but ideally, Ukraine has been also clear about its needs in terms of transition away from the Soviet legacy air defense for several years. So there is a request also, for instance, coming to Norway to buy from Norway or to get this assistance of Norwegian-produced or US-produced national advanced surface-to-air missile systems, NASAMS, a medium-range air defense system that is kind of mobile, and you can move it quickly to the field, strike, and go back. So provide air support, air defense support for units that move along the battle lines. Another issue could be, secondly, Ukraine needs long-range weapons, of course. Those are long-range artillery missile complex and heavy artillery. Just yesterday, US already announced that it will transfer some heavy artillery units, but also we're expecting some other states to supply those. Czech Republic also provided recently something similar to Grad, long-range artillery missile complex. So we already see some progress in this sphere, but it's not enough. And Ukraine needs to move to more Western, to more NATO kind of weapons, because these systems are still old, and it's actually the stuff that's going to be used, that it will be used and it will be broken at some point. And third, of course, Ukraine needs tanks and armored vehicles to break through the occupied defense and liberate the occupied territories. Fourth item is anti-ship missiles, to destroy enemy fleet and unblock ports on the Black Sea, because The ongoing threat from the maritime flank not only kind of pins down Ukrainian forces on the ground, it also blocks Ukrainian ports, and it prevents Ukraine from trade, actually, including food. So it all causes not only crisis for Ukraine in terms of military, but also in terms of food and agriculture and economy as whole. So the best means of doing this is to provide anti-ship cruise missiles. UK actually announced that it will provide some. Still, it has not been yet officially disclosed which kind of types of missiles, anti-ship missiles, the UK provided or will provide. Many speculate that those are harpoons, but many experts are quite maybe too critical about this possibility. So another system could be a sea spear. Anyway, there are tough negotiations should be going on getting those missiles, because what we've seen recently with the story of Moskva, who was sunk by Ukrainian system, Ukrainians can use those weapons and to provide security for the whole Black Sea terrain of the conflict. And fifth, maybe we need also, Ukraine needs reconnaissance and strike drones. So what we've seen regarding Bayraktar, but also loitering munitions that the US is providing recently. So small drones, kamikaze drones, for instance. The bottom line is that, okay, it's good to have a solid style systems and weapons that were given during initial phases of conflict, but now Ukraine also need to switch to NATO systems. So it will further increase the interoperability of Ukrainian army with the armies of European countries. And in case the conflict will be prolonged for maybe, we don't know when it will end. So Ukraine will have a chance to resupply and to get more weapons. And what is critical also is to start the training of Ukrainian armed forces right now, because there are a lot of excuses about not providing this modern or at least Western kind of made weapons to Ukraine, because it takes time, of course, to train people and to train to trainer, and then trainers will go to the field and train soldiers. But that should not be excuse for not providing these weapons to Ukraine. This is, I would like to conclude with this short statement.
Oh, yeah. Thank you so much, Artem. I think, yeah, that's really helpful to hear the kind of, yeah, what are the concrete actually military support that needs to be provided, because it has changed with the tactics of Russia also changing, and therefore the demands have been continuously changing, and with more threats coming from the Black Sea, that also is really helpful. So we are at the time that we were hoping to finish this already, but this would be a bit crazy to finish without asking the speakers, yeah, at least a little bit of questions. So just to check with everyone, if people are happy to stay for another like sort of 10-15 minutes, not if that's okay with you. Yes, excellent. Cool. Yeah, let's do that just so that we kind of, yeah, round it up. So there was one question in the chat also that it would be good maybe for all of you to respond to, which was also from Peter, asking what are the two most important things for defending Ukraine right now and in the coming weeks. And if I may add to that, that it would be great to hear if you could respond to that kind of for people who are listening with their kind of just citizens hats on, people who can maybe like lobby their governments or do those kind of actions, but also the second part of response, if that can be more directed to the governments directly, sort of, you know, those who are in the positions of power, what those people can do. So yeah, Maria, maybe we can start with you.
I already replied to this question, but taking into account that previously Peter asked about armament and weapons, I replied what weapons we need because but it's of course this is one of the issues. So this everything is in a package, is in one. It's not like just one answer to the question what is needed to make Ukrainian army and Ukraine itself to defend itself. There is the set of questions. So first and the most important is military aid. And here we also need to say that there was a significant change in last 2 weeks on the side of our Western partners, because previously they sent the weapons, but still it was in a limited scope, and very strict restriction on what kind of weapons could be sent. During last 2 weeks, there is lots of optimistic signals that the weapons which was completely prohibited 1 month ago is now already on the front line. And the general logistic of supporting Ukraine with weapons also has changed. So now they announce that they're going, I mean Western partners, that they're going to send something. But in fact, what they're announcing as a plan is already fighting. And that's also important. So right now Ukraine started receiving, so Artem has already talked about that, but that's a political change of track. Because as of now, it seems that the pressure which came from Ukrainian government and absolute majority of Ukrainian expert community, the pressure makes bring its impact or reaches some kind of a result. Because while our idea 1 month ago was to make Western governments or Western partners be more active in supporting Ukraine. And 1 month ago, there was really serious negative expectations or doubts that the victory, I mean also military one, victory of Ukraine on the ground is not 100% in compliance with the Western government's expectations. And that is why there were conscious political decision not to support with needed amount and weapons and a specific type of weapons. So as of now, situation has already been changing in a very visible way. And I think that this is also it will influence negotiations about which Hanna has already talked, because in case the scenario that Ukraine can military defeat Russian troops on the ground, in case this scenario is one with which Western governments are much more comfortable now than they were previously, then the logic of support to Ukraine is completely different from the previous one. It means more weapons, no fear to send, for instance, military vehicles or tanks or heavy artillery. And I think we will have much more air defense and anti-missile system besides of those first ones which came, for instance, from Slovak Republic to Ukraine. So Ukraine needs weapons, of course, but what we need from the Western governments and from the Western wide public, there is one source of daily financial source of Russian budget and Russian war against Ukraine, the source which is given on a daily basis lots of money to Russia, around $1 billion of US dollars. This is the purchase of oil and gas from Russia. And one of the arguments for those countries in the European Union or generally in the West who are not ready to refuse from buying Russian oil and gas yet is that it will make impact on local population in European countries. People will be unsatisfied, but in fact, the real harm, let's say economic after effects, is not defeating Western economy of any state. And in my opinion, it will be really great if white public, specific communities in other countries will start this discussion, and it will be a great support to Ukrainian government and to Ukrainian people if someone in the West, out of the white public, will start saying, we are ready to refuse from financing Russian budget on a daily basis and making this war continued. Because until we cut off Russia financially, the perspective of the warfare will be longer than it could be in case Russia will be cut off these sources.
Thank you so much. More military aid and quit Russian gas. Excellent points. Yeah, Hanna, can you add something to that? And then Artem will go to you.
Quite briefly, definitely if we go in details, that what Ukraine needs is air defense system, anti-tank missiles and anti-ship missiles, because that's what we use a lot and what we have in limited amount, first of all. Then we definitely need the aircraft, because Ukraine didn't have sufficient amount of them, and that is also to protect the sky and to protect the possible shelling of the civilians. That's why Ukraine insists, first of all, on these types, and then you can say, will it be NLAW or will it be Javelin? That is less important. Ukraine is also asking for the new types, because the first months, most of the countries discussed that they can provide the old Soviet, for example, equipment that they've been stored in Poland and Czech and Slovak republics. But now Ukraine is also talking that we need sophisticated, we can learn how to use them. And we see this process, like, for example, now Ukrainian soldiers are trained in Lithuania and Poland exactly to use the new types of the anti-missile systems. How countries are delivering it for us, it's really very different. Some countries like Estonia, for example, delivering to Ukraine 10 times more than France. And then you see the hundreds of millions of dollars being spent by the United States. We see the significant support from the United Kingdom, but we see Germany that for 1 month is discussing, should they allow the third states to sell Ukraine something produced in Germany 30 years ago. So that's definitely the problem. I see the question that somebody already even asked about Germany, how we can make Germany make decisions. That's the question that unfortunately only German citizens can push their governments and their members of parliament to change their opinion. We already see some changes. I remember how we talked about this in Berlin in December last year. It's been categorically no. Now we see that they're discussing what types they can and when they can. But here, it's not that we are in a hurry, but you need to understand that each day it is hundreds of killed people. So when you are, as quicker you provide, the better we can protect. We are not asking others to fight for us, but we need with what to fight, so this war would not come to the territory of the other states. And it's not Ukrainian hysteria or exaggeration. You should listen to the Russian leadership, who is already threatening Estonia, who is already threatening neutral Finland and Sweden. So we also didn't believe 6 weeks ago that such an open aggression would happen. That's why it's better to be prepared than have the same situation at your ground. And I will already briefly reply, because it's quite a simple questions about the logistics and the fuel storages. Russia definitely, the last few weeks, been intentionally targeting the fuel storage facilities that are important both for the seeding campaign that is happening right now and for the armed forces. What Ukraine is doing, first of all, is even before, we were not storing a big amount of fuel at one place. Sometimes we just didn't have sufficient money to have the big storages in advance. They were just coming, sold, and then supplied again. The second is that understanding that these places are always one of the main targets. So Ukrainian companies tried to separate them into the smaller parties and to distribute around the country. So to have the shorter logistical route and not to have everything at one point. What is interesting that sometimes Russians targeted just because it was the old map, but not that this fuel being surely stored there. As in Odessa 2 weeks ago, these very, very big blasts, they targeted the refinery plant The problem is that this plant been closed since 2013. It was a commercial scandal, so it's been not working there. No fuel storage is there, but very huge fire that woke me up at 6 o'clock in the morning, very strong blast, and the black smoke till the end of the day. So that is definitely happening. But as for now, Ukraine would definitely need additional supply of fuel, because a lot of the fuel we've been receiving previously from Belarus. And we need to understand that it's not only the storage, but also from where to get the new fuel and who would be able to supply us with the energy resources.
Yeah, thank you so much. Excellent also points around the additional supply of fuel that somehow doesn't feature that much in the kind of widespread media. Thank you for that. Yeah, Artem, would you like to add something?
Well, it's a lot has been said already, but if I would like to add to this infrastructure and logistic issue, we've seen that Russia recently also tried to target railway system, and we might expect that Russia will try to disrupt logistics by targeting railway corners, railway tracks even deeper in Ukraine. So that would be something also to protect, again, missiles and air raid system, what we need for. Also in terms of what the West can do. Well, we spoke about military issues, of course, but another critical issue, so we are not economists here, it's economic support, immediate economic support, which should come to Ukraine. We've seen that maybe 50 or 40% of population lost their jobs due to the crisis, due to the war, and around 30% of business was closed. So government now is running special relocation programs to relocate business to the western part of Ukraine. And I think a lot of should be done as the European Union and other countries and the financial institutions to support those who wanted to reopen the business, but also to give Ukrainian money to sustain its economy and to preserve infrastructure, social payments, but also to make Ukrainian government to pay debts. Or at least to maybe to protract or postpone the payment of some of the debts that are coming later in May. Not May, but maybe, for example, IMF debts, I think we will need to pay in September. So actually it's a big issue also on raising enough funds to sustain economy, because without real economy, without people, we will not be able to sustain also our fight.
Yeah, thanks so much, Artem. I think, that really is an excellent point. I think that resonates with some of the demands that some Ukrainian NGOs are currently making around abolishing Ukrainian foreign debt altogether to set the precedent for just moving away from that system together. But Daria, I'm going to hand over to you to kind of wrap up and conclude a bit.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the three speakers and also for the audience. I mean, it's just really, I think we planned this panel. It's amazing to hear from experts from Ukraine, especially given so much of kind of West blame takes on the country in the situation. So I really learned a lot from the three of you. Thank you so much. Also, I think like the main kind of it's been really optimistic listening to you, because I remember when we were starting to kind of try to talk to the broader public about military aid at the beginning of March, it was much more difficult. And in many ways, it shows that we as a broader public, as people who are not working for think tanks or governments, we also matter and kind of lobbying for those things. And that's what, as I understood, makes the shift as well, that we are now beyond the point where people are questioning whether military aid should be sent to Ukraine. And as Maria brought up, it was very much the situation. So it's kind of that we, in many ways, we won the information war, right? And we are really leading it and walking around just seeing Ukrainian flags and seeing Ukrainian murals. It's a very weird feeling because, being Ukrainian several years back, not many people knew much about my country, and suddenly it's a symbol of freedom and resistance. And it's really overwhelming every time I see a flag just next to a British house here. And so it really gives me hope that, if we keep lobbying, we keep having conversation, that we have to keep the pressure. Pretty much, that's what we have to be doing. People who are in the West, including us here in Scotland, and it also kind of listen to all of you really makes me very much proud as well at the level of expertise of Ukrainian military, of Ukrainian analysts, of people who are working already in international courts. I think sometimes, you know, when Ukraine is omitted from the talks as a kind of victim between different powers, is really a false representation, because Ukraine is, you know, the country, and Ukrainian people are the ones who are leading these conversations globally. And yeah, I think it's very important to remember about it, that we are the very front in most of the debates, I think, happening in the world in relation to democracy and freedom in many ways. Yeah, and thank you so much for reminding us this, and for so many points. I was just writing notes to remember. I don't know if anybody else would like to add anything, or the final remarks.
Just thank you as the organizers for this opportunity to speak, and I hope that in the future we will have more optimistic topics to speak about Ukraine in the United Kingdom, because this year we were planning the year of Ukrainian culture in the United Kingdom, and my organization just finished in December the research about how Ukraine and Ukrainian culture perceived in the United Kingdom. And we were going in the day when the war started to present it, and to start bringing artists and painters and musicians to Scotland, to London, the plans being very big within the Ukrainian Institute. And I hope that even till the end of this year, we will be able to return to this and to bring much more optimistic and different picture of Ukraine to the public in the United Kingdom and in Scotland in particular.
That's true, Hanna, and I think it's happening. I think the interest to Ukrainian culture and all things Ukrainian is definitely very high. So even it's happening in very chaotic but genuine efforts to bring it now more than ever.
And
yeah.
I also would like to make a specific point on after effects. So regardless of when this war will be finished, I think that the current structure of international relations, at least in, let's say, transatlantic context, will be significantly changed, because this is, in my opinion, this is the time for new regional or political alliances, which will be of much more importance, political importance, than the current, let's say, big structures like NATO and European Union. So not neglecting their importance, especially the importance of NATO and of collective defense principle, but at the same time, if you will have a look, so what is the difference, political difference between Ukraine's relation with Eastern European countries on the one hand, plus United Kingdom, and let's say some other countries in Europe, like Western Europe, Southern Europe, you will see a difference, and you will see when common challenges and common perception of the security threats, how it influence, and intergovernmental relations will be of much more importance, and new alliances will be of much more importance than they were before this war. And I try always to, you know, not always, but in the framework of this conflict, of this war, I try to range all Ukrainian partners. This is like my personal perception of the situation. Who is our strategic partners and who is more, let's say, on a tactical level, who is supporting us, but at the same time, in a longer term perspective, this cooperation will not be, you know, as close as possible. And in my opinion, the UK is actually the main strategic partner of Ukraine as of now, so not even the US. Exactly, because US is, let's say, too big international power, and they have plenty of interest, though they are, of course, strategic, and so, but on an operational level, what we have been witnessing from the UK politically, and from military point of view also, this is very flexible position, very reactive, very, you know, responsive one. And I think that that alliance, which was announced, but which didn't start working in terms of like concrete operation, like between Poland, Ukraine, and United Kingdom, this is working in a different way, but not the worst one.
Yeah, I will be brief. Usually I don't like to cite any officials, but this kind of statements really resonates by President Zelensky. He said recently that freedom should be better armed than tyranny. So we should always bear that in mind.
Yeah, thank you. We will.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. We've recorded it, and we'll share afterwards the recording. Thank you so much, really, and thank you everybody who attended as well on a
Yes,
Friday before Easter. So that's much
thank you to the
appreciated.
audience.
Thank you.
Follow us on Twitter. Follow us on Twitter. We write lots of Ukraine, about Ukraine.
Yes, we'll send the recording together with all the links to all the speakers, all the panelists, and yeah, it's an excellent Artem's quote to end on for sure. So with that, well, yeah, let everyone disperse into their evenings, and thank you everyone again so much. It's been excellent.
Bye.